My guests today are Stretch Meyer, the Federal Chief Technology Officer for Axonius Federal, and Heather Young, the Regional Vice President for Public Sector at Claroty. Stretch, Heather, thanks so much for taking the time to join me today.
Thank you, Jason.
Hey, thanks, Jason, for having us.
Let me set just a little bit of context for our discussion today. Earlier this year, the Air Force introduced a new cybersecurity training specifically focused on how to protect systems such as gas pipelines, power grids, and traffic signals. The course is the first to meet the standards of the quote-unquote control systems security specialist role under DoD's cyber workforce framework. Air Force cyber leaders are also working with the Air Force Institute of Technology and the Defense Acquisition University to introduce more control systems training. The service needs cybersecurity experts who can operate in this world. Now, the Air Force isn't alone in recognizing the continued convergence of operational technology and information technology, OT and IT. The need for people and technology to manage and secure OT systems continues to grow. This is in part because bad actors recognize the so-called soft targets these OT systems can present as these technologies converge. In fact, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency in May issued an alert that said unsophisticated cyber actors are taking advantage of poor cyber hygiene to hack operational technology systems in the energy and transportation sectors. And because of the convergence, operational technologies are acting more like IT. CIS is also taking steps to incorporate these OT systems into its CDM, or Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation Program, and its monitoring dashboard and tools. So for more on how agencies can harden their OT systems, we turn to our guests. Once again, Stretch Meyer from Axonius Federal and Heather Young from Claroty. Heather, maybe I'll start with you on this one. Operational technology, we hear a lot about it. I just went through a bunch of things. What comes to mind? What are some of those examples when you think about operational technology across the federal government?
I think that there's a breadth of different agencies that have responsibility for operational technology. The ones you mentioned, such as TSA, as well as DHS, and their overall mission, are constantly evaluating our cities, our airports, even down to the refueling on our military bases. So these are, water agencies that, monitor our drinking water or work on, our wastewater systems. This is the critical infrastructure, that we use in everyday life.
And to be clear, I mean, these also range everything from alarm systems, control systems, what they call SCADA systems, all the way down to that critical infrastructure that you went through. And the growing challenge here is that they used to be, I think, air gap, they used to be these standalone systems. And now as they become more like IT, that is creating this cybersecurity challenge.
Absolutely. The responsibility has started to shift to the Office of the CIO and a responsibility of the CISOs to be able to have true continuous monitoring, to be able to understand what the attack surface is. You have to have that coalesced viewpoint. And so being able to bring in any of the OT network data into a security operations center, for example, is very important in order to achieve that continuous monitoring and attack surface management. So it's really important to be able to feed these unsophisticated systems that were never built with safety, and many are antiquated, to be able to feed that information into the proper hands.
Stretch, join the conversation. As Heather just pointed out, a lot of these OT systems were not designed with security in mind. They were not designed to feed data back to other systems. What is the challenge a lot of agencies are facing when they start to say, hey, we need to do better, we need to do more to secure these OT systems, and we need to understand the data that's coming from them?
Well, a lot of the reasons I like having a lot of fun doing like these webinars and working with Heather and team is to just think about the OT world as a whole. It's such a niche specialty. When my whole background is IT engineering and infrastructure. And every time I talk to people on like Heather's team or other customers that have OT engineers, I just think about how they're speaking their own language. And like half the time you can't even follow it. And the reason I bring that up as an analogy and laugh about it is I had a junior engineer come to one of my DoD calls. And I said, hey, how do you think that call went? They're like, you know what? I don't really know. You said a bunch of acronyms. They said a bunch of acronyms. The call wasn't going well. You said a bunch of more acronyms, and now there's a call for next steps. It's kind of the same thing I think about when you see like OT in the news. Everyone sees critical infrastructure and they see, oh, our water supplies are being attacked, but they don't understand how isolated these networks are and how specialized and important it is to keep them off the internet because of the sensitivity of these tools, and they can't easily be upgraded. And so that's why I really enjoy working with the Claroty team, because of not that visibility. Then when we combine that information together with the rest of the IT assets, it really gives you a holistic view to take actionability against all of it.
And I think that's a really good point. We have real live examples, especially with some of the conflict that's been happening in the Ukraine as well as the Middle East. We've had attacks from nation state actors that have disrupted service to, many of the water authorities. Clarity had the opportunity to go out and do some on-site analysis with the government to ensure that those systems were made whole, and that we could close some of those gaps. So I mean, as you mentioned, some of these are very remote locations, and actually our engineers had to crawl down into some of the water systems to be able to access some of those OT assets. So this is the physical side of cybersecurity.
When we talk about OT systems, and you brought up several examples, are the risks any different than IT? I mean, are you looking at, for instance, systems that are set up in such a way that the challenge of securing them is much different, or is it just age? It's a legacy system, a legacy system, a legacy system.
Yeah, they actually have completely different frameworks. So, as Stretch said, it's kind of hard to follow some of the acronyms. But Purdue University actually created what we call the Purdue model, which is what OT systems utilize as far as their layered security. And so being able to talk to the various layers of that security and infrastructure of the network is really important in order to make sure you understand everything, every device that's on the network, because some of them don't react the same way as others. They may not ping for long periods of time, and so that's why continuous monitoring is so important. So we are a little bit different there as far as that is concerned.
Yeah, and a lot of people are, especially in the IT world, they're really focused on the OSI model and trying to troubleshoot the different layers of the basics of why something's not working. Then you throw in the frameworks of the Purdue model. It's a whole different aspect of troubleshooting and trying to build the security within the infrastructure. And so if you think about, a lot of visibility, I mean, you have some organizations that they have these OT engineers and they don't necessarily even have the visibility of their OT gear, where they might have to take someone from Heather's team or what have you and go in and physically show them in the data center where this OT equipment is so they can figure out the best architecture where to deploy sensors.
I'm going to take you all half a step back. You mentioned acronyms, but we're going to try to simplify it for our audience. You
Sure.
mentioned the Purdue model, the OSI model. Just if you can do it in 30 seconds or less, what is the Purdue model? How's it different than the OSI model? Can you make it simple?
If I had to oversimplify it, the OSI model is just a standard for, type of troubleshooting of how devices talk at a network level. So it goes from levels 1 through 7, which would be like physical, data link, network, so on and so forth. And then the OSI model, it's just focused on levels from 0 through 5, from physical processes to basic controls, so on and so forth. Now, I'm not that savvy on the Purdue model, but that's just a high level, difference of ways to look at how you're going to troubleshoot the environment.
Yeah, it's essentially taking an architecture diagram of the network, determining, what is talking to what within that network, and at what access point. Where does the human come into play? Where are the physical processes running? Literally in OT, we can go down to a card in a stack in a server and tell you, if that device is doing what it should be doing. So, we bring it down to the zeros and ones, serial numbers, and, all of it. So it's more of just the map within a network topology for an OT system.
And as we've talked a little bit about, these OT systems are not developed normally in terms of the way most people are used to it, I should say. The IT systems is something that we're all familiar with. Has there been a specific incident or a specific time frame why now this convergence is happening? Is it the modernization of the OT systems? Is it the realization that, oh, well, we don't need someone to crawl into that pipe anymore? We could, if we have the right technology, we could do updates automatically. Is it that realization, Heather? What's changed?
Yeah, I think that the attack surface has expanded, and it's because we've had advancements in technology. And now with AI entering the picture, we have the ability to really reach out to any environment and look for its weaknesses and vulnerabilities. We've had multiple attacks over the last several years: Volt Typhoon, Typhoon, even going back to Colonial Pipeline. All of those involved, attacks that could very well affect us and have affected us. Our information's being stolen. So we've seen an uptick in nation state activities, and of course, people want to profit from those vulnerabilities. And if they're easy to access because a system is connected to the network, why not?
Yeah. Uh, on a lot of, I think about the basics of this AI and large language model technologies. And if you think about how we use it in our basic lives, and then you start thinking about how easily that can be weaponized into attacks, think about all of these talented um, threat actors that are really good at what they do. And now they have a large language model to quickly spin them up and educate them on OT. Maybe they didn't have an OT
Mhm.
background, but now all of a sudden they're like, well, wait a minute, I can I can warp this large language model to do this attack for me of the skills that I already have. So I'm going to
Mhm.
train these large language models of what their attack patterns are, and then leverage what it knows about OT and incorporate that into their playbooks.
Stretch, you're opening the door for a long conversation about AI, but we are pushing up against the
Yeah,
break.
yep.
So before I walk through that door and talk to AI, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, that's when we'll start talking about what can agencies do to really to defend against these new types of attacks. First, as I said, we'll take a quick break. You're listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carasoft on Federal News Network. Welcome back. You're listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carasoft on Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guests today are Stretch Meyer, the Federal Chief Technology Officer for Axonius Federal, and Heather Young, the Regional Vice President for Public Sector at Claroty. In the last segment, we talked a lot about the what OT is, how things are integrated with IT. But one thing I want to get to, and Stretch, you started to allude to it, is the challenges around OT and the cyber strategies related to them. You mentioned AI. We'll go there in a second, of course. But generally speaking, why is OT harder to secure than IT? What is it? Is this just a people issue? Is this a resource issue? Or is it an understanding issue? Give me some of those challenges.
Previous to working at Axonius, I was the ISM at a government agency where I was in charge of their SOC, their entire IT infrastructure, the whole security landscape. In this agency, we also had a secondary SCADA network that my team had no visibility of, and there was a specialized team that worked on it. But we were still responsible for the network that they worked on, and then helping them out as needed on their specialized isolated SCADA network. And a lot of it is lack of education. No one from my team was ever sat down by this team and said, hey, here's what's on this network, here's why we maintain it. And then a lot of the times they were so specialized in some of the things on there, they didn't even understand some of the basics of securing the specialized network. Now, it was secured from a standpoint as in that it had no physical access to the internet. But if you think about if someone was ever to get in and touch the network, this is where our team could come in and help them understand the basics of IT security and locking down VLAN, so on and so forth, where they really specialize on how are they going to lock down the cameras and how are they going to lock down the door, the physical door access, so on and so forth. So a lot of my personal experience of my lack of OT knowledge was really the OT teams and the IT security teams talking to each other, knowing they're all on the same team and help them with the education aspect.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think that there's not been a huge focus from a regulatory standpoint on securing OT, but now that there's more visibility and we have, agencies that are writing, that policy, it's really important for everyone to understand how to come together. I think that there are, critical sectors that we focus on. We're working with a healthcare client today that has been utilizing a tool set. I mean, sometimes when you use an IT tool set to scan a OT or a medical IoT network, you run into challenges. And so this particular client had been using a tool set that was misidentifying um, infusion pumps and calling them printers. So imagine if you're in a hospital setting and somebody pushes a printer patch to your infusion pump. Now we're talking about critical life-saving issues. And so you need to make sure that you have that education, and by working with vendors who are experts in the field, who have spent so much time working with these devices, assets, understand how they talk, because they talk different languages than IT devices. So it's a have to have, not a nice to have. This is something that we have got to wrap our heads around and we've got to start working on.
Heather, your example is really interesting. What was the reaction of that client who said, "Oh, these aren't printers"? Like, were they surprised? Were they like, "Oh, we've had that
Uh,
problem before," like because OT is hard? Like, what was the reaction?
yeah, I think it proved a point. I think that the medical device owners, that team, they were really hesitant to be using a tool set that was developed for IT on medical devices. And so they weren't providing that access to the hospital. This was all done in a test facility. And so, yeah, it's something where they said, we can't have this. We need the CIO and IT side to understand why it doesn't work, and we really need to work with vendors who understand the technology better. And so that brings us into a great partnership with organizations like Axonius, because we cover the medical IoT security as well as OT, and Axonius can then manage all of the attack surface, including OT and medical IoT devices.
Yeah, there's a lot of synergy with all of that because if you you know if you think about some of the basics that we're going to grab from the OT from the IT perspective, we're going to see what's there from routers and switches and firewalls and IDSs. But when Clarity's specializing in identifying everything that's going on with that and actually help um, come up with the path forward, you combine all that together. Not only from the OT side are we going to show the entire attack surface and report on it, but it's going to be passed all the way through from the OT side to get that visibility and see what the gaps are. So you can proactively see, well, how does someone get onto the network? And made it through layers of defense and then made it to the OT side. Well, if we can proactively shut all that down, yeah, you know, this, the idea is to keep everyone out of the news.
But we've heard some of the challenges, different models, the Purdue versus the OSI model, the fact that a lot of the training happens around the IT instead of OT, and the fact that we have two separate staffs with two separate, kind of focus areas. How to solve this? What are some of the ways that agencies can start integrating their strategies, integrating their security operations center, start really understanding how they can take steps to better protect their OT systems?
Yeah, I can start there. CIS has done a great job of providing OT cybersecurity courses. So I've actually seen them on the CISA site accessible to government employees. We also have the SANS Institute, who provides a lot of training for OT. So from a learning perspective, there are resources. But I think that when you are starting to apply this into a real life scenario, it's really helpful to work with experts who've been in the field and seen, every different network type. And I think it's really important to be able to leverage those resources. And organizations, agencies they're looking for solutions, they're looking for vendors that have that experience like Clarity.
There's, I think, that idea of training, but in the short term as well, there's also you can't wait till people are fully trained. Are there
Sure.
things that you are seeing agencies doing today to reintegrate their strategy? One example comes to my mind is the Defense Department adding an OT layer on their zero trust strategy. I know I've heard from Randy Resnick, the lead, the
Mhm.
program lead over at DoD, and he keeps promising this fall for that layer, that overlay to come. Are you seeing more agencies taking steps like that, Heather or
Yes.
Stretch? Go ahead, Heather.
Yeah. We actually participated in the OT fan chart review. And so, we as a member of the OT Cyber Coalition have provided a ton of feedback around that. We want to get it right, and they understand that there are different activities when it comes to all of the bases that we protect and all of the physical assets. So yes, they are making that move. We're seeing civilian agencies though that also understand this is a data center issue. This is a building security issue. Um, there's a lot of different agencies that own different things, and we have to protect those things as well. So whether it's a building or whether it's um, an airport, we definitely have to start somewhere, and we are seeing a lot of agencies ask those questions, putting RFIs out, and talking with vendors like us.
At the same time, there's obviously some tools out there. Stretch, maybe talk a little bit about this idea of a cyber asset attack surface management technology. What is it? How does it work? How does it help agencies really start to protect their OT environments?
You know, that when I started here, that term wasn't even a term. And it's kind of funny. I'm watching it over time as it's evolving. And it's a lot of the reasons why I actually came to Axonius. I worked as a cyber engineer architect in the DoD in the intelligence space my whole career. And more times than not, I have seen homegrown versions of what we do. And either people
Mhm.
would make it in Elastic or Splunk because they would overlog the details and they would manually correlate the details together, or they would use SQL databases and a bunch of teams would connect to all these different vendors' tools and pull in what was going on. But the challenge with doing that is these tools are constantly updating and then they're not proactively seeing the internal network very well, or they're not aware, they don't know what they don't know. So the whole idea with the chasm framework, especially what Axonius is doing, is how can you proactively let a leadership team and an operational team at both levels proactively know what the unknowns are. Where before in the past it was this kind of a you don't know what you don't know. Now you can go and say, oh, well, I can see all these devices that aren't known to endpoint security. They've never been scanned by the vulnerability scanner. Oh, I see this part of the network where there's OT there, and we don't even have any sensors on that network. How do we fix that? Or if there is some aspect that's discovered with the OT, well, how do you deep dive and specialize into what's the path to fixing that? Like what do we do with that? Maybe we just caught a manufacturer serial number. What now? How's Clarity going to take that and go way deeper with that? Or what are they going to show that's not even known? And then when you combine the two tools together and the solution as one holistic view, how do you collectively let the OT teams and the IT teams see the same level of landscape? Because, right now, like this is a very big challenge just in the compliance world, where the compliance teams don't have access to tools that they're too complex to look at it. That's multiple times on the OT side, where people don't even have an idea unless you're one of the OT engineers. So if we could take the tool sets and give visibilities on both sides of the house and let the teams collaboratively work together, you're going to see a whole new level of success of locking down the networks.
I
And
think it's
Heather,
really sorry, Jason. I think it's really important to note that we both have very specific specialties. Claroty did not, create a platform product that replaces what Axonius does. And I think a lot of solutions out there today will tell you that they are able to do, cover everything. We use integrations because we know that we're the best at OT, but we have partners who are really good at network protection. And so I think it's really important to note that there's no silver bullet for this problem. And I think that, working with best of breed is a really important piece.
You actually summed it up really well, Heather, because we're just about out of time. I was going to ask you for some final thoughts. So I think bringing this all around is to understand who your partners are, understand what they can do, and then how those partners can work in the broader community is so important, because this OT challenge is only going to increase, I think, over time as more of these, as this integration happens with IT. And we will have plenty to talk about going forward, but today we are out of time. So let me thank my guest. Stretch Meyer is the Federal Chief Technology Officer for Axonius Federal. Stretch, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Jason.
And Heather Young is the Regional Vice President for the Public Sector at Claroty. Heather, thank you as well for joining us.
It's been great.
I'm Jason Miller, and you've been listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carasoft on Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search innovation.